Hi, my name is Kyle Burkholder, and I'm the pastor here at Covenant Church. Thank you for being here and for being part of Covenant Conversations. Our desire is that the conversations we have in this space extend into your relationships and ultimately, maybe even impact your everyday life. For our friends in Northwest Ohio, we believe that life happens in community, and we'd love to invite you to join us and join the conversation in person. So just head to bgcovenant.org/visit to learn more. Now, let's get in the conversation. Hey, welcome to Covenant Conversations. My name is Kyle Burkholder, and today we're going to be talking about work as worship, or what does it mean to be a Christian at work, maybe more appropriately. And so with us today, I have Mark Beebe, and I've known Mark for, a decade or more. And I want to let Mark introduce himself, tell you about his family, tell you kind of what he does and all those things. But let me just start and say, welcome, Mark. Thank you for being here. Who are you and why are we listening to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know why you're listening to me yet, but who I am, as you said, my name's Mark. I have been wrestling with questions about faith and work for quite a while. I grew up in a very, very Christian home. In fact, my dad ran a Christian K through 12 Christian school. Different schools for over 40 years. But that was my life, and it was attached to a church. And so without being a PK, I was as close to being a PK as I could. And so what does it mean for worldview and all that? And so I grew up in that world, and fun to wrestle through it. But more importantly than that, I have a wife of 9 years. We have 3 kids. I have an 8-year-old son, a 6-year-old daughter, and a very soon to be 4-year-old daughter.
Wow.
And so we've been in Texas for just over those 9 years. Kim, as you know, was here before I was, but it's been a good time, and that's gotten me connected to more of the faith at workspace as well. Being down here in San Antonio and getting connected to other folks, and including yourself. So it's been a good run.
Okay, so one, your family's awesome. I did not know all the full details, and now I'm overwhelmed thinking about it for you because my kids are older, not a whole lot older, but enough older that I'm kind of tired thinking about those ages. So that's exciting. 2, you're in Texas. You're thinking about you think a lot about the faith at workspace because that's your actual job. That's what you do.
Correct.
All I know is I would call you the vice president. But tell me, what is your actual title? What is the name of the organization? And then can you explain what that organization does?
I'll do my best. It is one of the weirdest things to explain, but yes, I am one of a few vice presidents at an organization called C12. Specifically, I'm a vice president of our field operations. So it's probably easier to explain what C12 is to help explain what that means in terms of what do I do. So C12 is a network of Christian CEOs and business owners. So we have about 2,600 companies within the network today. And within that, we are also in the peer advisory group space. So while we have about 2,600 Christian CEOs or owners, it's not a networking group. We form local peer advisory groups. And what that does is it allows them once a month to gather for a full day to wrestle with this very topic of how do we not only run a great business, because we do believe that God is honored by great business. That's part of work as worship and work as mission and all of that. But then how do we see our companies as a platform for ministry? So we use the tagline in our mission statement. You'll hear it a lot: great businesses for a greater purpose. There's a reason why God has given us these businesses, and He's placed us as stewards. And so within that network, at C12, we provide 2 things. We provide primarily content and the framework for those CEOs to wrestle through those topics. But then we also provide full-time chairs. So we have about 175 chairs, mostly in the United States, but we do have some international markets in Brazil and Malaysia, Singapore as well, soon to be in Taiwan. And those chairs are full-time facilitators, coaches, consultants that work with CEOs in local markets.
Mm.
So if you back that up further, what does it mean for my role is I lead a small team that is responsible for the recruitment, ongoing training, support, coaching of those chairs. And so really we want to see healthy members that produce healthy forums and have great companies seeing ministry fruit throughout their organizations.
I mean, that sounds like an enormous job. I know that talking to our mutual friend and CEO of your group, Mike has been circling the greater Toledo area that we're a part of for a while. And
Yeah.
Last I heard, he's edging closer. You're getting closer. So if somebody in our local market hears this, you can be the one to lead out in this, and you can bring that type of thing here. Because what I've learned from C12 and being kind of in the C12 milieu. I mean, I get some of the emails and just being friends with Mike, I get a lot of this kind of like the overflow of the things he's thinking about. And what's so amazing to me is how intentionally you guys work to make people intentional about their work, if that makes sense. Because so let maybe start to kind of get into like, you've got the wisdom here and we're trying to pull it out of you. So what our common experience is as Christians, our common experience is we're kind of like, whether we want to admit it or not, we're somebody on Sunday. We're probably mostly that same person in the evenings when we're home with our family. And then we clock in wherever we are. And we have to take on a different persona, a different person, a different role. We kind of are, whether we like to admit it or not, two different people. Where there's the work me and the home me. There's the work me and the church me. And perhaps we weren't designed that way. So what is it about us that takes us that way? And then what is, like, how would you say we were designed? What's the actual kind of direction we should be thinking about?
Yeah, let me start with the direction. I don't fully know why. I mean, there's the obvious answer of sin, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to be seen a certain way. There's ego, there's pride, there's a lot of things that get in the way of us operating how we're designed to be. But truly believe that what we refer to as an integrated or a flourishing life that we are meant to live, and that's not actually. I think a lot of times when we use that phrase "integrated life," we're talking about, hey, bringing your faith wherever you are, and that may be true. I hope it's true for Christians and for believers. But really, what we're talking about is you should be the same person on Sunday as you are on Monday. Same person on Monday at Tuesday. You should be the same person at church, at work, at home, regardless of your context or where you're going. And that's certainly challenging to do. And from in our context, we work primarily with CEOs, and that's an interesting world because I think in that case, there's two sides of the coin. On one hand, you can feel more free to be truly who you are because you're in control, or at least you have perceived control.
Right.
Versus, when I started in my career, individual contributor, I'm scared to death. Am I even allowed to be a Christian at work? And what does that mean? But on the other side of the coin, it can also feel like you have more to lose. And so it can feel scarier. But regardless of where you are in your career and what kind of job you have, we tend to make up excuses or reasons of why it wouldn't quite work. I'll give you a real quick example. We've been involved in a handful of interviews, various positions that we have, and it's astonishing to me when I interview someone. We ask about what are they excited about to work at C12, and they say, I can finally be myself. I can finally not the fact that I'm a Christian. And there's a sense that that's really fun and cool and exciting, that we would want them to be that. But it's also really sad because there's a realization that they've bought into a lie, that they can't be themselves Monday through Friday in their existing jobs or their previous roles. And so we do a lot of work from the top down to say, okay, how do we break that cycle and get people to realize, 1 hour a week, that's not the only place you should be integrated. You should just be yourself, regardless of where that is, and hopefully that's a Christian self, a Bible believing self.
That's super interesting. I love the idea of integrated, the integrated whole. I've been tossing around this idea of a disintegrated whole. Like, what is sin? Sin is like disintegration.
Yeah.
And so even like living a disintegrated life, even though it may not be like an acute sin, that I'm a different me here than there, there's a disintegration happening there, a pull, and that's interesting the way you say it, because that leads me to thinking of like into integrity is part of this whole concept, and so like lacking integrity, now what? And so I almost pastorally I go, well, who am I lying to? Am I lying to my church, or am I lying to my work? Because one of those things is not whole for me. One of those things is not really me. Which one am I acting in, and which one am I really? And that's not a question that I'm expecting to answer. It's just kind of like, even the way you phrase it kind of prompts that in me. What would you say? So like, let's say I am who I am on Sunday morning. There's kind of an authenticity inauthenticity thing, and authenticity is kind of a champion word in our culture. And yet, to your point, you get all these people who come in, even to your organization, and go, I've never been fully authentic. Can you talk about the kind of authenticity, inauthenticity piece of who we are, who we're called to be? Am I a disciple on Sunday, but not on Monday? Like, kind of just work through some of that idea.
Yeah. Well, first I would say to your comment, am I lying to my church, or am I lying to my workplace? You're lying to yourself, and you're sinning against God is what you're doing, right?
Nice.
Like, if we're going to be really honest about it, and it hurts, and that includes all of us.
No, that's good.
That's not I do it every day, right? And so, but it's an honest place to start, and so I think that's important. And so when we talk about authenticity, I just know the most impactful disciplers or mentors in my life, I was confident in who they were, right? And that didn't mean they were perfect. I mean, a lot of people who shaped me were very far from perfect, but they meant what they said, and they were who they were, and there was an honest pursuit of things. And for whatever reason, I'd be interested in your perspective on that, actually, within the church. But the church almost has higher standards at times, where we feel pressure. We said the prayer, we made the decision, we did these things, and it's great. And now we're expected to be up and to the right in our growth, right? And that can put some unwarranted expectations on people, where they started a journey based on confession and repentance. And for whatever reason, we can be afraid to confess and repent repeatedly, right? And so there's expectation. I want to be able to lead in that context. I want to have relationships with the pastor at times, right? I want, there's status within the church, and I think sometimes that brings it out. And so there's probably a group of folks that struggle most of being authentic in the place of worship. On the other hand, I do think there's other people who just have fear, where they really are struggling with, they feel the most honest with themselves when they're at their place of worship or in their church. And it's like, am I allowed to, right? Am I legitimately allowed to be that person? Am I allowed to pray at work? Am I allowed to have my Bible at work? Am I allowed to share Jesus at work? And that's just more education. We can get into some of those questions too, but those are some of the polls that I have found pretty common as people wrestle with it.
That's super interesting, because that's all pulling on our insecurity and like the lack of, am I allowed to be who I really am? Which leads me to, I think something you were saying is super interesting, and maybe you could walk us through, I don't know, take a real example and fictionalize it if you have to, but how would you, so let's say I'm a leader of an organization. I'm working out in the secular world. Maybe you can address that there is no secular world, if that's what you would say. I'm not sure, but so I'm not working in a church. I'm working in finance, or I'm a plumber, or it doesn't matter, right? White collar, blue collar, all the same. But I'm the leader of my organization, and I'm a Christian. Would you say you guys run into people who aren't fully themselves? Even there's the other side of inauthenticity is, now I have to kind of pretend a little, to your point, like, hey man, I'm going to make mistakes. It's not all up and to the right. It's okay to be, to some level, vulnerable about, hey, this is a journey, and we're not perfect. Do you run into that? Is there situations, how would you coach someone through that, where if I'm going to say, I want to be a Christian in my workplace, so I have to be perfect in my workplace so that everybody sees Jesus clearly in me. Right. That feels like the other ditch, right? But I bet that's pretty common.
Oh, it's very common. So it's easier not to try, right? I mean, I'm afraid that I can't do it. I'm afraid that it might not even be allowed.
Mm.
And what if I screw it up? What
Yeah.
if I try to share Jesus in the workplace, or what if I um, try to steer people towards Jesus, even without being overly evangelistic? And then I have a big screw up.
Mm.
That's
Mm.
hard, and that's real. And I think any of us who have followed Jesus for any amount of time, we would say, yeah, well, yeah, I can point to all sorts of examples where you feel like you let people down, especially if you are in a spot where you're leading people. But
Yeah.
when you look at the workplace, most people, you choose to go to church. It's an elective place to be. You're opting into an agreed upon structure. Um, Most people are going because they think it's good for them at some level, even if
Mm.
it's a legalistic level. Like it's good. I can point to reasons why I go. People go to work to survive at a base level, right? And so then it becomes, okay, I'm opting into a scenario at work or at church where I feel like I can do this because I can come and go anytime I want.
Mm.
But work, there's livelihood attached to it. And that puts different weight on it. I don't, there's in a sense, there's more to lose at work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and for some people, that's where they have more, honestly, that's where they have more relationships as well, because you spend way more time at work than you do at church. And wow, if I take this step, if I screw this up, not only do I risk losing a livelihood, I risk altering the relationships that I really care about. So they're very valid and real concerns. They shouldn't be dismissed. I mean, I think we can speak honestly about still the weight and the commandment that God has for us to still be integrated, to still be authentic, and to point people to Christ. But that doesn't mean that there's not real challenges there.
That's really good and helpful, and maybe hopefully freeing to people to hear that like this is a common struggle. Is even starting in the idea that I'm going to be fully myself and fully who I've been called to be as a follower of Christ at work. That's maybe a journey, and I don't know, maybe it's not a microwave, but it's a a crock pot in the sense that you got to slowly warm. Maybe you got to slowly warm that thing up, and maybe a step in the right direction is better than nothing towards the fully integrated whole, or towards a safe space of sharing, or being yourself. Um, the question I would maybe that brings me to is I was kind of thinking, I saw an article this week that said I don't know, I think it was on the Gospel Coalition, and it said, are we all really missionaries? And it's really a funny title. I didn't, full disclosure, didn't read the article because I've read a lot like it. I would assume, because I've read both sides where people say everybody's a missionary everywhere you go. You're all missionaries. And then there's another sect of faith that says, let's not diminish what a real missionary is. Real missionaries are out, and they're in the jungle and they're doing other things. And so I think we at our church would say you are commissioned, and that's the commission, mission, missionary. You're commissioned to go and spread the gospel through your every breath, and your work and your life and your home and your kids, or whatever you have. That is what you're called to do. Would you affirm that? Would you argue with that? What would you say about the idea that maybe I'm called to be a missionary in my workplace?
Uh, I think it's probably semantics. I do think we're all, if we're followers of Christ, we're disciples,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
disciples are meant to make disciples. So
Mm.
when I hear missionary, it feels extremely evangelistic, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like I have to go share Jesus. I have to like reach people, win souls, do all these things. I think one of my favorite examples, we have one of the chairs in our C12 network. He lovingly refers to himself as the sheepdog,
Mm.
which is, everyone's like, what does that mean? That's kind of weird. But when he explains it, he says, look, I'm not the shepherd, right? Jesus has already said he's the good shepherd, and there's lost sheep. My only job is to point people. Like the sheepdog runs around and just tries to herd the sheep towards the shepherd, right? Like that's it. And so
Wow.
he's not a shepherd. He's not it takes a load off, and it reminds us who we are, and what Jesus's role in all of this. So we don't change people's hearts, but we can point people to him. And
Mm.
for some, that might mean sharing your faith, sharing your story. Other times it might just be really loving on people and being a great friend, right? And not compromising your beliefs or your integrity or your values. So when we get confronted with this idea of an integrated life where how do I be the same person on Monday as I am on Sunday? At times we feel like, okay, shoot, I have to go 0 to 100. You use the crockpot analogy. And to that, I would argue, well, how many people on Sunday are like super evangelistic on Sunday morning?
Yeah.
Honest, probably not that much, right? You might shake a hand, introduce yourself to someone, but for the most part, it's a discipleship context. You're sharing maybe things you're wrestling with. Maybe you're just with common people with a common understanding of why you're there. But we can get hung up on this one aspect of what it means to be a disciple, which is extremely evangelistic, and some people are wired for it. They're gifted for it, and they should lean into it. I'm not discouraging evangelism at all, but it's one aspect of what God calls us to, and I think the biggest point with that is God does not call any part-time disciples. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're a follower of Jesus, and again, that doesn't make it easy. But regardless of the context that we're in, we should not be changing who we are. We may change who we're interacting with, but we should aim to be the same.
Okay, so no matter what my work scenario, I'm a full-time disciple, no matter what you would say, and then I'm to be living out the life of a disciple, who by definition is using their giftedness to make more disciples, and I'm doing that full time. So no matter what my work status, my context, I got to be a disciple in that context. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest gifts I had was someone who challenged me in this early. This was probably 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I was working not at C12. I was at a larger enterprise organization where the general thought was like, hey, you're not really supposed to talk about this stuff. At least that was the perceived thought. No one ever told me that, right? But I'm in cube land, and are you allowed to do that? And so you make up the rules. But I was challenged, and so one of the things I did, I had phone calls, and most of the team I was on, we were all remote, so different locations, and this was pre-COVID, so no one was using video yet, right? Just phone. Anyway, I had a phone call, and I was super nervous, but I said, I'm gonna ask my coworker if I can pray. So I did. I said, leave the name out, but I said, hey, I just want you to know, being a follower of Jesus is important to me. I already pray for you, and so I just want you to know that if there's anything specifically that you would want me to pray for, I'd love to know. And if you don't, that's fine too. Just know that I care about you and I pray for you.
Wow, no, that's really clever, because you didn't ambush. You opened a door, but said it's fine to walk away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. How did it go?
I learned more information on that phone call about her and her family than I did in the previous year of being her coworker.
Wow.
A father who was getting ready to pass, a son which by the way, I didn't know she had a son who was getting ready to come out of prison. I was like, oh my gosh, that became a dangerous question. So I had another call later that day with another coworker. I said, I'm going to do it again. And it's the same exact thing. And just like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there was so much here. And so I started to get really confident. I was like, all right, next one, here we go. And I remember calling the next person. It was like a week later, maybe. And she goes, yeah, no, I don't believe any of that. I said, oh, okay.
And
it's okay.
That's a pretty good batting average. You'd be in the Hall of Fame with that batting average, though.
Yeah, I mean, there's more stories of wins and losses, but the point is, yes, they have freedom to walk away, and it's okay.
That's a really, I mean, I don't know that this was ever going to be overly practical or prescriptive, but that's a really clever tool. And I would say probably in the integrated side of it, like how do we have integrity as we're entering into our workplace that way? Maybe prompt one for people as they're listening to this, watching this. Prompt one is start to pray for your coworkers by name, and that's not hard. Write them down and put them on an index card in your pocket. And when you have time, when you're in line at the grocery store, when you're stuck in traffic, whatever, pray for those coworkers by name, so that maybe, and again, this is your path and not everybody's path, but it's an interesting, like, so that if God might nudge you to tell them that and invite them to enter in further if they want to, now you're doing it out of a place of honesty, and you actually, what a beautiful thing to start praying for your coworkers if you aren't already. So that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that, because that's, I think our problem most often in workspaces. I mean, I remember in a Fortune 500 oil company, I struggled. People found out because I used to be a missionary, and so they're like, "Well,
Right.
why are you here? Where'd you live? Why?" And so I sort of would be revealing in that sense, and people would slowly find me. But there was a real difficulty in a sense of how do I, especially in a increasingly remote world where we don't spend a lot of face-to-face time and there's not a lot of collaboration around the water cooler. How do we make ourselves known to others and invite others into that journey with us in a safe is the wrong word, but maybe an inoffensive or delicate way that respects their potential to say no, respects their boundary, respects that they may have a different belief set, and that's okay, but also isn't afraid to say, this is who I am. So that, I think, just as one example of a way to enter in, that's really profound. So thanks.
Yeah, the only word of caution I would give in that is even someone who might be listening to a podcast like this. If it's a thing that I'm supposed to do, so that's a tactic, and yes,
Right.
let me try that.
Right.
Go back to the integrated. Like, no, if it's not a desire from God to be praying for your coworkers, like, it's not a project, it's not a manipulation play.
Yeah.
And we can feel that pressure because, well, I listened to a podcast and that's what the people said. Maybe that might be a good start.
It's cultivating the Christian heart for my coworker. It's cultivating the Christian heart
Yeah.
to be fully integrated at work. And then
Yeah.
what does that look like, Lord? Yeah, no, that's a great word of caution, because we can immediately become an obligated religious people that are doing the thing we're supposed to do as opposed to doing the thing the Spirit's invited us into. So I think that's great. What about the person? Okay, we're getting there. What about the person who says, "Hey, Mark, that's great for you. Great boldness. You're remote. They didn't have any rules against it. I don't actually know if I'm allowed to do that. And look, there's a lot of protected classes at work, and I'm afraid if I say the wrong thing to the wrong person, like, I could actually just get fired because I don't think I'm allowed to say these things. And especially it's 2023, the world's divided. Isn't it not like allowed for me to do this?" So somebody listening is thinking that right now. What's the answer to that? Do you have an answer to that? Is there some uniform principle out there? How do we think about that?
Yeah, so religion is a protected class.
So we are a protected class. A religious person is protected.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, there's what's legal, and then there's what's wise, and those often are different things. And so, different states do operate a little bit differently. So I want to be careful not to over encourage or speak too broadly. But for the most part, there is no rule out there that says you cannot talk about religion at work. Some workplaces will say, "Hey, it's not best practice. We generally try to stay away from religion and politics and money." In the same way, this is maybe a bad example. In the same way that legally, no one can tell you can't talk about your salary with your coworkers.
Yeah.
It's still, maybe don't do that, right? It's still not a great practice to do.
Maybe not.
You're allowed to, there's no legal repercussions for it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's understanding, okay, what's wise in the scenario. But I think, again, it goes back to, like, are we trying to go 0 to 100? Are we trying to save the entire company? And I am going to force this on people. That is not wise. It's not good. We should respect people. It's part of loving people. But what we should always feel comfortable with is sharing about who we are and why we are the way we are. And so it comes down to story. Do you know your story? Are you comfortable sharing it? Are you comfortable sharing a a minute version, a 2 sentence version, a 20-minute version. I mean, as you talk with people, you're building relationships. I would never on day one in a workplace ask for the prayer example that I
Yeah.
gave previously. I mean, honestly, that was after at least a year of getting to know these people. And so could I have done it sooner? Probably. But my point is that it was born out of relationship and what makes sense for that person at that time. In the same way, I uh, I don't know. You may have already been in Ohio when I experienced this, but I remember our church here in Texas when we did a Love Your Neighbor series, and it was really simple. You know, what we did is everyone had a little neighborhood grid. What's the house across from me, diagonal from me, behind me, next to me? And it just starts with, do I have a relationship anywhere? So do the same thing with your cubes or your offices at work. Do I know do I know his wife's name? Maybe not. Maybe that's a place to start. Hey, let's just get to know each other. And then you can start, it's stair steps. So once you actually have relationship, then you can look for, does Kyle have any signs of relationship with Christ? Oh, I wonder if there's any conversations that could lead there. I don't have to force it, and be wise. If Kyle says, "Hey, I'm not interested," respect it, right? Dust the sand off your sandals, and it's okay, because again, sheepdog. We're not the shepherd. We're not changing hearts. Us, but we are asked to be stewards of our influence, and that includes the people around us and our cubes and our neighborhoods and everywhere else outside of that hour a week on Sunday morning.
I'm stuck on the sheepdog. I'm terrified that I just earned a new title. That's so good. I mean, it's just so good, and I'm sort of blown away by that and jealous I didn't think of it at the same time. So we're about out of time, and I think you've given us good boundaries to consider, maybe some good nudges as to how to begin to think about our lives at work as intentional lives that we might live as disciples, fully integrated in all spaces, home, work, church, etc. What maybe have we missed? You just mentioned even holding off with somebody for a while as a way to love them. What have we missed in the kind of more the general sense? If it's a summary, if it's a hey man, here's how I crystallize the whole conversation. If I was talking to somebody, if Mark Beebe is talking to somebody who's I have your job, but at a just any old company USA, and I go, I don't even know kind of how to do this. I got to love my neighbor, but don't even know what that means. How would you sort of summarize the way that conversation, you would take that conversation and launch me into my workspace as that integrated whole? Like, what would that look like?
I would say start with being extremely honest with yourself. What do I really believe? What do I really believe? Not what do I do out of obligation, or not where do I go on Sunday because I think it's good or whatnot. And do your best to test yourself. Say, am I authentically living out what I believe? And it's honestly a dangerous question if you're going to be honest with yourself. But I would much rather the person who it's like, what? I honestly don't know if I believe all that to be true.
Yeah.
To keep wrestling with that, rather than try to go save people when they're not even really sure what that means. It's not. You don't have to rush into anything. But what do you really believe? And are you authentically living that out? If you can get into, and this is where the church stuff is huge. If you can get into a church community and other people who are really willing to wrestle with that question, a lot of the how-tos are right in front of us. They're not difficult. It's asking the question, what's the small step I can take? All right. Well, for me, it was, can I pray for that? Can I ask someone if I can pray for them? That's a small step. For others, it might be, I'm just going to show an interest in what my coworker's up to, or I'm not going to be mean to them when they do something I don't like, or um, I'm just going to pray for. I'm not going to tell them I'm praying for them yet. I'm just going to pray for them. But if you're willing to be honest, if you're willing to wrestle with it, and if you're willing to let God show you what is real, what does He have for you, then it's a pretty exciting. In Ephesians 2:10, it says, God has created in advance work for us to do. Whoa, what does that mean? In advance for us to do. So there's things in mind that He has for us, and that doesn't mean that He has huge things every single day. But it also might mean that He's got a bunch of little things every day. And so I'd encourage people, spend time with Him in the morning. Open my eyes. What do you have for me? And if that's your perspective, and that's what you're looking for throughout the day, the opportunities will be far greater than you realize that they are, because we've been blind to it. We've been conditioned to not even look for the opportunities because we don't want to do it for whatever reason that we've talked about. But when you open your eyes to it and say, God, show me the opportunity today, I think you'll be surprised at the chances you have to share your story, to point people to Jesus, pray for people. And even if you're in the oil company and you're a former missionary, people will find you.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's impressive. I mean, that's huge, because it is. It start with yourself. That's great. God is God and I am not. That's huge. He has set aside things for me to do, but none of them require me to be Jesus. So representing or being an ambassador of Jesus is different than being responsible to become Jesus in my workplace. I can represent, but I can't be. And so that's freedom in and of itself. And I love that. Those are good words. Probably don't want to add anything to that, because if somebody listens to just the last 3 minutes there, I think they get the whole point of this, which is summed up nicely. Mark, thank you for making time for this. Where I know this for a fact, the C12 website has resources. There are all kinds of things out there. There's a newsletter that I get that has sort of wild, mind-blowing, whether it's leadership things or all these kind of things. How does somebody get contacted, or how does somebody get connected to C12?
Best place to go is joinc12.com. And there you can find out more information. If you are that person in Toledo who start local groups, you can find us there. If you are looking to join into a local community as a member, you can find us there. And if you just want some free resources, ebooks, blog posts, articles, there is a ton out there. And then there's also a great video playlist on our C12 YouTube channel that are full of exciting case studies and examples of what it means to live out your faith at work. So those are two places that would be good to start.
Awesome. Mark Beebe, thank you for being with us. Everybody, thank you for listening and being part of our Covenant Conversations. You can continue the conversation and in your homes, in your offices, even, maybe. And we look forward to having a conversation with you again soon. So thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.